Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom. In this lesson, we're going to discuss, does peace actually work? And when they say abundance, what does that mean? And how can it work together, right? Like abundance and peace, or peace and abundance, or PA and AP, so on and so forth, right? So let's talk about it a little bit because there are many things that people try to strive for only to come to find out that it will never exist. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, when you go to the gym, there's always something to strive for, whether that's your endurance, your strength, your power, your look, your physique, whatever, right? And in martial arts, it's the same thing. You have the white belt, a blue belt, an orange belt, a yellow belt, a brown belt, so on and so forth. There's always something to strive for. However, along the journey, along the path, so on and so forth, people tend to give up when things become extremely difficult or too difficult, etc. I've been in that situation myself. The reason why I'm stating this is because, I had a student in martial arts, and when things started getting difficult or, complicated and complex, and things started to get put into different how do I say this? Perspectives, right? Their perception on things started to get altered, meaning they would go to the gym. And if you're ever on social media, there's a gentleman by the name of Anatoly, right? He goes around as a janitor, so on and so forth, at the gym, so on and so forth. And I say that a lot. Why? Because, may the fourth be with you. So I hope you understand this. Now, when he's going around the gym, he's dressed up as a janitor, and there's these big guys, so on and so forth, all these muscles, etc., lifting heavy weights. I had a similar experience when I was in high school, and I just appreciate the videos. Now, here's the thing. The gentlemen that normally act out or so on and so forth are judging a book by its character, right? They see a tiny individual, they see him dressed up as a janitor, and then they assume that they know and they presume to know everything, and they get frustrated because they're not seeing everything because they're only paying attention to certain context, which is in front of their frame. Now, when that context gets blurred, it makes things, how do I say this? Come up, or it brings things into question, right? So Anatoly will walk around, and there's gentlemen, I forgot which one it was, but there was these big bodybuilder dudes, like power lifters, right? And he goes, "Oh, excuse me, I'm just mopping the floors, so on and so forth. Do you mind if can I move the weight?" And they're like, "Yeah, if you think you can move the weight, go ahead." Now, mind you, there's about 315 pounds, or about 400 pounds, give or take. And because he is, well, tinier than them, they didn't think that he could move it. Well, he, with ease, goes over, picks up the weight, moves it to the other side, mops the area, picks it back up, and places it back down, and then walks away. And they're looking at each other like, is this for real or is this for fake? So on and so forth. Now, I had a student with a similar thing, right? He was like, "I'll give up if you want me to give up. I'll step down, whatever, so on and so forth." And I literally looked at him and I said, "I don't want you to give up or step down. I want you to do better. I want you to not only think different, as the Apple slogan says, but to think better as well and do better, right? You don't just go to the gym to get size, right? You also go there to improve your health. So if you're not a runner, identify your weaknesses, your weak points, and then focus on that for a certain time period. If you suck at running, go outside and run if you hate to do that thing, right? And then eventually, I'm not going to say you'll like it. However, you will be decent at it, right? If you suck at creativity, then work on it, right? Understand what creativity is instead of being logical and then uncreative, because as they say, the devil cannot be creative, the devil can only replicate. So when the devil replicates somebody that is creative in order to push back, right? Because that's what the devil does. It always pushes back, kind of like devil's advocate, so on and so forth, right? It likes to push back. It likes to do arbitration and all these other things and act like a judge, etc., trying to play both sides in a logical format, right? Because, yeah, color is very logical, right? This pen is very logical. I could click it open, I could click it closed, so on and so forth, right? However, it's used as a writing utensil. When you start to get creative, you can use it for other things, right? And if you remember other videos, I told people that I would hand a pen to people and I would ask them, how many ways can you use this pen? And they would use the pen in different ways, utilizing some of the things from The Wolf of Wall Street when he says, sell me this pen. But in actuality, he was trying to see the creativity within the sales individuals that are conducting communication, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're working on commission, you have to use communication in order to acquire some type of commission for yourself, right? If you're in a different area and you get paid a salary, you might be a creative person with a logical mindset depending on the field that you're in. So therefore, you have logical steps that take place because everything has a foundation to it. And then, of course, you have to have creativity in order to understand what the other thing might occur, right? For instance, if you're developing an SOP for a security feature, right? There are certain protocols in security that are always there, but then the nefarious actors or hackers or black hats, whatever you want to call them, so on and so forth, they will get creative and learn ways to bypass all the logical steps. So if you cannot think creatively, then you have to, well, rely on, well, logic, right? Because when creativity meets logic, it creates art. And if you're very logical, you'll probably fall into science. And if you haven't seen Class, by all means, go ahead and check it out because, well, let's face it, I can switch the words around. At one point, I stated that it stood for creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality. From a militaristic standpoint, it could stand for what? Coast, land, air, sea, and space. However, most people don't understand the space in which they're in and they get put in place. Now, place is a certain type of location, right? It's very logical. But what you do in that space resides upon you. You can choose to enjoy it. You can choose to manipulate it. You can choose to do whatever you want in it, right? However, if you do not think with a better mindset, then the bitterment, so on and so forth, the resentment, or everything else will play into factor because negativity weighs heavy on the brain. Now, if you're questioning or you're correcting or you're saying this, that, and the third, well, then therefore I might have to speak like Yoda because you're listening to respond instead of listening to understand. Most people will say that, oh, this person is parroting. Oh, this person is saying the same thing over and over again. Oh, I know what you're doing, etc. Okay, well, I'll change my language so that when you try to say something, I will force you to understand what I'm saying to slow down because you know so much, right? But if you don't understand a language and there is a barrier, it forces you to slow down. Earlier, excuse me, earlier today, I explained to somebody why, or one of the reasons why Yoda in Star Wars spoke backwards, because it forced the brain to slow down in order to understand what was being said, in order to interpret the full meaning of what was being said, not just the face value of the words. So if people have a big mouth and they're quick with the tongue, they're going to respond quickly. If you jumble up everything, so on and so forth, not like jambalaya, so on and so forth. However, if you jumble everything up and scramble it around, but say the same words in a different order in which the brain cannot receive it, it will slow the brain down so that it can understand. Now, when people try to utilize tactics and things that they learn, for instance, people know that I've been a magician for more than 20 years, and people will say, oh, here we go again. Now, they don't say that in a courtroom when somebody's defending them because they're using what's known as case law, which is previous facts, history, and cases that, well, the judge agreed upon and, well, gave a certain verdict to, right? So they utilize that as evidence, as a leverage, as a key to assist the individual that they're trying to defend that normally is quick with the tongue, right? Because they might be emotionally triggered, right? And so when people are emotionally triggered, this is why they say you should get somebody to represent you in a courtroom, such as an attorney, right? But if you're in business, who do you get, right? Well, you normally get a marketer to explain the idea, right? And to make sure that everything runs smoothly. But marketing is very complex, right? If you think it's simple and easy, yeah, it may be simple and easy for some, but it may be difficult for others because of the complexities at hand. And if you don't understand what the marketer is saying, or the marketer doesn't know what they're doing while they're trying to sell your product and market it out to the masses, you're going to need an attorney, right? And then the attorney will suggest, well, maybe we could go to mediation, arbitration, or we could go to court and sit in front of a judge, or maybe we have to push this up the chain of command, so on and so forth. So you go to Supreme Court, or possibly sit in front of a jury of your peers, such as the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Where everybody was quick of the tongue, didn't want to understand, but one gentleman did, right? In the book To Kill a Mockingbird, everybody assumed, well, this gentleman had a knife, it was a specific type of knife, etc. Well, one of the people on the jury ended up having a similar knife, throws it onto the table and says, I have one of those too, so we cannot rule certain things out, right? And this is what I'm referring to. Do better, don't do worse, don't give up, because at the end of the day, everyone has somebody that they look up to, and somebody is looking up to them, so on and so forth, right? And if you give up, then it's just going to have a trickle down effect, or you're going to get other people to try to pull you up. But if you give up, if you throw in the towel, so on and so forth, it's going to be, well, it's going to be heavy on the brain. And as Gary Vaynerchuk says, when he talks about hanging out with older people, you don't want to spend your whole life or your days wondering, what if I kept going? What if I got the one more rep, right? What if I maxed out? What if I tried to go running or jogging or whatever on a hot day, because it's uncomfortable? And in life, you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortableness, because, well, that's not just how you grow, but that's how you succeed, right? You don't learn something by it becoming easy. A tree does not grow in a vertical format without understanding how to push against gravity, right? Because it has to work with gravity with enough force and strength. If you've seen my other video where I talk about the bark as well as the stem and the branches and everything else and how it comes together, and as it goes upwards, so on and so forth, things still replicate what the roots emulate, right? The roots represent stability. It represents foundation. You have the structure of the bark, the trunk itself, so on and so forth, right? The bark is the protection, right? And so when I say bark, etc., let's talk about a military term here. When somebody is barking, they're normally using their words in a certain format, right? Because they're trying to tell you something. However, you need structure, right? So there's the trunk, right? However, with that structure, it gets surrounded by the bark. You're not going to reveal the trunk because it makes the tree vulnerable. Now, the leaves and the branches are malleable, just like the roots are, but they all work together. Most people don't understand how peace and abundance can work together. Well, maybe if you put your shit aside and you say, hey, can I get a piece of that? Sure. Can I have a piece of this? If you remember the movie Hook with Robin Williams, there's a scene where the kids are saying play to Peter, right? And Peter doesn't understand. He goes, this used to be your favorite game, and they're eating, so on and so forth. He goes, there's nothing here to eat, so on and so forth, right? But eventually he gets it, right? And he learns how to play along, right? Now, the thing is, they, after the altercation of, trying to understand what the term play meant, they get into this somewhat of like a dissing competition. Rufio versus Robin Williams' character, Peter Pan, so on and so forth. And they go back and forth, and then eventually Peter gets the idea of how they communicate, how to do something, and then he's able to jump in. If I was using hip-hop terms, it's like trying to be in a cipher. People are freestyling, there's a certain tempo, there's a pitch, a tone, so on and so forth, certain vocabulary that's being used. So when that they're using their rhetoric, whether it's to a beat or a cappella, they're able to go ahead and enter the cipher, delivering rhythm and rhyme right on time, unless they're not understanding that it's a cappella and there's no sound to be heard. So if you want peace to work, you have to put your stuff aside and learn to share. Because as they say, sharing, yes, is caring on one hand, but some people don't like you touching their territory, using a business term from sales, right? Because marketing has what's known as market share, meaning we're going to understand what part of the market we can share amongst everybody else. The sales department has territories, and they don't want people to impede on their territory, right? However, if they don't understand marketing, they will never get why they make so much money, right? And when I say they make so much money, I'm talking about the people that work off of commission that are highly intelligent, so on and so forth, but they utilize their words and the tricks of the trade in order to acquire the funds. Whereas others within the marketing field understand the terminology as well as the legal aspects when it comes to morals and ethics, and then they decipher whether or not, well, is this the right thing to push or not, right? Because let's say somebody has a great idea, well, the marketer will step in, well, this has already been done. This has been done and utilized in this way. Oh, I have a great idea for a more energy efficient powerhouse or fuel source, so on and so forth. Yes, but what if that turns into a weapon, so on and so forth, right? How do we counteract those measures, right? But then they give it to the sales department. They just learn how to counter objections because they're just trying to collect the check because they're not on salary. Maybe some are if they're leading people. However, the creative thinkers, the ones that understand both creativity and logic, yes, it's about pictures and words, but do the words make sense? Do they speak in an artistic way to the individuals that you're trying to get to? And then does it speak to their psyche using science in order to understand their needs and their wants and to solve their problem, right? Think about it that way. And again, if you haven't seen Class, remember, don't just think different, think better. Check it out because it's a way of thinking better and it shows you how to shift and alter things. One of the things we say is perspective is reality or perception is reality, so on and so forth. However, to one person, that's one thing. To another person, it's another, right? So if I say one thing in one context, but you're only relying on the meanings and the associations and the information that you've been given, you will not listen to understand. You will only listen to respond. And when you listen to respond, you won't have peace or abundance. You'll have chaos and restriction of stock, right? Because there's only so much in inventory, which means that there's not enough abundance or enough in store to go around. However, when people come together to understand, so on and so forth, then it becomes different. Like bartenders who pull money, right? Or pull tips. They share the tips at the end of the night and everybody does their part, right? However, in the restaurant situation, not everybody pulls tips because not everybody can pull their weight. They rely on others. And when the lazy people get fired because they took shortcuts, because they didn't understand how to apply peace and understand abundance, they get kicked out, don't understand, talk a lot of smack, and they get disgruntled, right? But those who can pull their weight, people enjoy them, they think they're sexy or whatever, and they also are able to, well, bring in money just like everybody else. Well, then that creates abundance in the industry. So this not only applies to business, but it applies to life, it applies to relationships, and it applies to most of the things happening in society today. See, most people will utilize their words without ever experiencing what they're dealing with, right? Or what they're attempting to say. So just to use Donald Trump, for example, all the chaos with wars and things like that. Yes, it's great when you're in business and you want to use militaristic terms and words, so on and so forth. Some of you may say in rear with the gear or fire watch, this, that, and the third. However, if you never served in the military, you have no idea or the context in which you are stating it, and you don't know exactly what you're saying. It's like playing Call of Duty, understanding certain terminology or getting information from someone because you have a listening piece somewhere and you're trying to tell people what somebody is saying and what they mean, and then all of a sudden it gets so complex, people get frustrated instead of trying to work together because they're working against one another in order to maintain chaos, right? Instead of creating both not only a balance of chaos and order, because you need change to happen in order to get better things out of life, but if you want peace in your life, you need to understand, not just respond or try to utilize the magic trick that you learned in order to put more money in your pocket. Most people are short term thinkers, like short term con artists. They don't think long down the road. And because of that, well, they get pennies for the dollar, if that makes sense. And some of you may get it and some of you don't. And that's perfectly fine. See, the ones who do get it, I just encourage you to help others understand. And those that don't understand, strive to work with those that do. So, till next time, my friends, in your journey of freedom, I'll see you in the next episode. Mwah. Peace.